everyone, and welcome to the first and last episode of Halika Na Halaya, an Ube-based podcast for exploring the Filipino diaspora. I'm your host, Marcus Bertasio.
I'm Gabrielle Velasco.
Our debut and final episode will be exploring the relationship between Ube and the Filipino diaspora. In particular, we hope to take a deep dive into the question of whether a single plant can really serve as a symbol for Filipino-ness.
Thank you for that, Marcus. So to begin with our podcast today, I want to talk about Filipino migration. So from nearing the end of the mid to end 19th century, we see concentration areas of arrival from Filipino immigrants in Hawaii and California. There's also an infographic that demonstrates Filipinos didn't just land there, of course. There's Chicago, Pennsylvania, really random states. Filipinos also make the fourth largest immigrant group in the United States. We take after Mexico, China, and then India. So there are many migratory waves starting in part to colonization between the Philippines and the United States, particularly economic, political, and educational ties. We see more job opportunities that are particularly in the health field, connecting Filipino immigrants to here. So today we see family reunification channels, which is something that I have personal experience with, in order to achieve long-standing permanent residence, which is, I guess, authenticity in being American, and it's through familial links. And depending on your point of view, that can be kind of fucked up. So I'm looking at this next infographic. It's from migratory waves from the 1980s to 2018, which is pretty recent. That was how many years ago? Like 3 years ago. 1980 is when my mother immigrated here. 1990 is a decade later, is when my father immigrated. And we see a population increase. It's slow, but it's gradual. To 2018, the numbers literally almost triple. As Marcus and I have discussed in the past about literally Filipinos can be found everywhere. We see Filipinos in Mexico, Filipinos in Africa, Europe, and even Alaska, where my mom and dad found halo halo, which is a form of ube dessert. And they were really actually surprised to see ube in its pure form in Alaska, happily eating ice cream in very cold weather. Yes, my family did that. We are going into what is ube.
Yes, now let's meet the titular tuber. Ube's Latin name is dioscoreaalata, and it also has a wide range of common names. Ube, the name that we'll be referring it by, is its common Tagalog Filipino name. Purple yam is the English name. Ubi is the Pampangan, another language within the Philippines. Bahasa Melayu and Bahasa Indonesian name. Uvi is the Tongan name. Uhi is how it'll be referred to in Maori and the native Hawaiian languages. And Ovi is how people in Madagascar will call it. This highlight of long names really shows the fact that this tuber is indigenous to Southeast Asia and the Polynesian islands all throughout and has been a long-standing ingredient. Ube is one of 600 yams within the family and is known to have phytonutrients, which can prevent cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, and some types of cancer, as well as the pigments that make up that bright purple hue have been displayed to have anti-inflammatory effects. There have also been studies researching its anti-diabetic and digestive health properties. Now, before we move on, another important note is that ube and taro, which are often confused due to their purple nature when mashed up and used in sweets like boba tea, they're actually quite different. For the taro is a white starch with purple flecks that has a subtler and more savory taste, while ube can be found to be violently purple in any state that it's in, and has a much sweeter taste, which lends itself to desserts. Thinking about desserts, let's go into a little history lesson on that. Now, while ube is an indigenous ingredient of the Philippines, meaning tracing this history of desserts and its travel to the US isn't exactly straightforward. So to set up a temporal background, we'll use the known history of some popular brands and chains that are well known for their ube products. 1918 is when we first see ube jam mentioned in the Philippine cookbook Condimentos Indigenas. 1925 is when the iconic Magnolia brand, known for their ice creams, is established as a business. Jumping over to 1966, the Goldilocks Bake Shop is opened by Filipino-Chinese sisters Milagros Lilenyi and Clarita Lileno. Then in 1969, the Raymar Foods brand establishes itself in Pittsburgh, California. It's also known for its Magnolia ice cream, but it's unrelated to the previously mentioned one, and the complicated history about that we won't have exactly enough time to touch on this podcast. Then in 1976 is when Goldilocks opens their first international shop in Los Angeles. 1979 is the founding of another well-known bake shop, Red Ribbon, by the Mercado family. And in 1984, Red Ribbons also expands to the States with their first shop in West Covina, California. Now, halika na everyone. We're going to take a little bit of a break from history and from theory to read some fan mail from voices within the Filipino diaspora and their personal relationship with ube.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm going to start off with a letter from Martello Marshmallow. Dear Ube, you became a permanent part of my life 2 decades ago, and I could not be more happy about our lives intertwining. I have yet to meet a flavor that provides the same feeling of nostalgia. I interact with chocolate too much to pinpoint to one single event. Fruit flavoring is underwhelming, and I stray away from anything mint-like. Then there's you, Ube. Each time you reach my lips, I am brought back to family reunions where I ate as much as you as possible. I would sneak mini ube cakes into whichever room I was staying in and hide you from my brother. Every time we return home, I would return with a full backpack of you. I haven't seen you in a couple of years, however, Annapolis seems to be out of supply of ube. I cannot wait until our next reunion, however, because I know it will be sweet. The next letter is from username Unga Bunga. There's an image of ube fries, not taro, and also a Jollibee T-pose man. Hey Ube, I know you might not know all of us, or any of us for that matter, but thank you for being here. From when I was a kid going to this Pacific Market Square and I'd smell you from that bakery on the corner. You made me feel better when I was lonely back then, knowing you would be there and be delicious. It was comforting to have something to look forward to. And even today, I think of you as comfort. You taste like childhood and you taste like home, whether you're in bread, fries, or empanadas. You're always a joy to see. Thank you. This letter is from Purple U911. Dear Ube, you are very vibrant in taste and color. My mom used to steam you and eat 3 or 4 of you in a day with some sugar. A healthy dessert for those wanting a semi-sweet treat. Thank you for being small, sweet, and purple.
Those letters were really heartwarming. Now, Gabrielle, I have a question for you. What was the last ube dessert you've had?
The last ube dessert I had was my birthday cake in September last year, 2020. It was from what we call 85 Degree Bakery, and it's just our local chain bakery shops that have a very large supply of ube pastries that we regularly buy from. What about you, Marcus?
I think the last ube dessert I had was ube roll, like an ube roll bread. Things like that. I have it usually for breakfast with like condensed milk because I have too big of a sweet tooth. I think it was also Goldilocks brand. Now, despite how long ube and ube desserts have been in America, they're these well-known brands that we grew up with. In the recent years, I don't know if you've noticed, there's a large trend of ube flavored and fusion desserts. If you look through the hashtag on Instagram and food articles that you see floating all over the internet, you'll see people raving about the tuber as a fun new ingredient with an explosive color. From ube-flavored donuts filled with boba pearls to ube-flavored cheesecakes, the variety of sweets that are getting ube versions is unlimited. So how can we maybe think about this deeper and in our connections to diaspora identity? We're going to be using Martin F. Manalansan's Beyond Authenticity, Rerouting the Filipino Culinary Diaspora. It's a chapter from a book all about Asian American food studies. And the main argument of his piece really is that we should be looking at the discussions of authenticity in relation to identity. When you talk about authenticity, it's very easy to get into a stalemate, especially when it comes to Filipino cuisine. The outside influences have been coming for centuries, even before the Spanish set foot on the islands. And so we as diaspora need to take the cuisine to shift through our complex emotions and shame and pride that usually comes with our identity. So, Gabrielle, how do you think we can use Manalansan's piece to think about these ube trends and our identity as diaspora?
That's a great question, Marcus. Well, the first word that comes to mind is, I'm going to say it, exoticization. The quote that you have in front of us is, let's confront, not evade. Our islands have a large history of colonization and struggling, and the stalemate between European identities, ideals, and indigenousness between, I guess, these ties. So the idea, let's confront, not evade. The exoticization of the ube is particularly with this idea of ultra-violence, you know? It's like the color of the plant itself kind of serves as a symbol for the Filipino identity. So, Marcus, what do you think about Manalan San's argument about Filipino authenticity, as we see in some of our collected sources that authenticity is actually a large topic subject we include?
Yeah, exoticization is definitely one thing that we would need to look out when it comes to this new ube trend. But I think another side to the ube trend is that the remixing of nostalgia for these desserts and these fusion desserts that a lot of the diaspora are creating can also be really a way to start a deeper understanding of Filipino culture for non-Filipinos and Filipinos in the diaspora alike. You know, a lot of people say food is kind of like that gateway into culture. And so I think using Manalan San's piece, we can think about all these points, the kind of friendly exchange of culture from food, or also the dangers of exoticization. And so, yeah, I think that's really maybe the way that we should be going about thinking about these trends is it's complex and it's diverse, just like diaspora. But food isn't the only way that we can see ourselves as a diaspora. How about media, Gabrielle?
In media, we can see a lot of representation. Representation is
a language and in which we could see images demonstrate our daily lives. We use representation to configure ourselves. Coming from a different field standpoint, we look into different Filipino representation. So I want to think about, who are we seeing in today's media? What do we see in our every single day? Me and Marcus have looked into Cartoon Network's Steven Universe as a primary example of Filipino-ness, because in episode 23, captioned The Good Lars, it's about ube and this becoming of Filipino. Lars Baringa is a Filipino character that we didn't know of his Filipino identity until this very episode. Lars Baringa is a character that started in the very first episode. So we could see that this character is kind of integral to the cast, the character cast, and the entire universe. But introducing this representative as a Filipino is something that we haven't seen before, Marcus and I. To the diaspora, it came as a large surprise that Lars Baringa came out as Filipino through, I guess, exposing himself through a childhood memory of making the ube roll cake. In the scene, we can see the spectacular titular tuber and the process of making into a cake. So I want to propose to the audience. Do you know of any Filipino identifying characters? This is not really like concise to cartoon characters, but just anyone that are just known in general. The first thing I could think of is a character from Superstore. I believe it's on
NBC.
CBS network or something like that. His name is Mateo, and he's actually a Filipino immigrant. And it's a comedy show, so of course they shed light in a comedic way. In Steven Universe, they see the ube as an opportunity to shed light on Filipino-ness. What about celebrities who are Filipino, and what does this say about our association in Western media? So, Marcus, do you know of any Filipino identifying characters?
Well, I haven't watched the show exactly, but it was a really big thing for a bunch of my friends. Like, they marathoned the show like twice over. But the show The Good Place from 2016. It started in 2016. One of the main characters is played by Filipino-Canadian actor Manny Luis Jacinto, and his character also is supposed to be Filipino-Chinese, just like himself. But other than that, I really can't think of any other actors. He's definitely a recent actor, but in terms of my childhood, I can't think of a single Filipino character, I think, other than, watching actual Filipino TV.
I definitely agree, except for, Steven Universe when it came out in
2017.
Thank you. After taking media and identity, I want to say, halika na! Let's talk about our love for the dioscoreaalata. Marcus?
In our final fan mail section, before we close off our podcast, we'll be reading 4 more letters from the diaspora. Our first letter, Dear Ube, oh my God. As the sole member of the Ube Addicts chapter here in my SoCal neighborhood, I would like to say that, as a big fan, I look up to you. You're like so freaking tasty. Growing up, pan de ube was always on my kitchen table, being a staple of my morning breakfast. Whether I had you with coffee or as a late night snack, you've always reminded me of my vacations in the Philippines, getting freshly baked bread with that ube filling. Always stay yummy and purple ube. Ingat, from username RUBE Stan971. Isn't that a heartwarming tale of breakfast? Our next letter. What's up, my dear purple yam? You were in the steamed rice cakes, the puto, the cake rolls, the halo halo ice cream. You remind me of life with my lola and lolo, gatherings with the whole family, car rides to the market, singing and eating and playing. One of my earliest memories is actually me eating steamed ube in a high chair. You are the best. B, baked into fun treats. E, eating. Purple roots connecting me to my roots. I will always love you. Thanks for building my bones, you funky purple team. From XX Ube Lover XX. Our next letter, Ube, where would we all be without you? My mom loves making desserts involving you. She's told me a lot about what her parents have made with you before too. There's only one store near where I live where we're able to find you, or anything with you in it. So it's been a little while since I've had you, but I know we'll meet again soon. Sincerely, Ube Formride 723. A lot of our fan mail comes from places of nostalgia, but that's not the only perspective that Filipino in the diaspora can have with Ube. So our last letter here starts with a question. Am I a fake Filipino? So I don't like Ube, like at all. It's not its color or what it's made of, I just don't like the taste. But yet I have been called fake Filipino because of my distaste for it. I understand it's a big cuisine within the Filipino culture, but does my opinion about food invalidate my Filipino-ness? I like other foods that some find gross, like dinuguan and balut, which I would think are even more so Filipino. So why is my Filipino-ness questioned when others are not? No hate, all love, no cap. XOXO, peace, love, and boba. Now we end our podcast with this letter because it's a different perspective than a lot of the nostalgia from the above letters. And it really brings us back to our opening question on whether a single plant can really serve as a symbol for Filipino-ness. And in my opinion, it's near impossible for any food within any culture to be kind of a representative for that identity because, like our last letter, there is so much more to Filipino cuisine that may seem as a symbol of Filipino-ness. Other than dinuguan and balut, there's adobo, there's lumpia, pancit. I think that ube, while not maybe serving as a symbol for Filipino identity and Filipino diaspora, I think it's a perfect lens for us as a diaspora to think about our identity, not as a monolith, but as something really diverse. How about you, Gabrielle? How would you answer our opening question?
I think that Filipino identity is definitely not a monolith that I guess the European perspective or lens would propose, but from the lens and framework of a plant like ube, it helps us preview, I guess, the complications behind it. Looking back at the last letter really spectates that certain question. Identity is in fact too complex, and yeah, there's so many different foods that could be compared to Filipino identity. So that was Halika Na, our very first and last episode. I'm Gabrielle Velasco.
And I'm Marcus Patasio.
And
Ingat
ka!